Thank you very much indeed. So for those who don't know me, my name is Kate Ames. I'm the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Engagement and Access here at Torrens University. I am delighted to be supported here tonight by Tara Jacobson, entrepreneur and regional advocate, PhD student, Colin Beer, PhD student with Torrens University and a researcher and educator in regional and University Affairs, and Natalie Cook, who is our Director of Industry, Innovation and Engagement here at Torrens University. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm on Mununjali country down here in southeast Queensland and live on the scenic rim, so have spent most of my life actually living in regional areas. So Wendy Mason, who was one of our panelists, has unfortunately had a bereavement and will not be able to join us this evening. So we do send our best wishes to you, Wendy, and your family. Tonight's topic is close to our hearts. I've lived in rural and regional areas for most of my life, and over the past few decades, while access to education has become easier than ever, regional students remain underrepresented in higher education and with poorer outcomes generally. And so the question for us is, how do we actually turn the dial? Specific to this conversation this evening is really having a conversation about how we better support students as we move within our institutions to create more work-ready, employable-ready employment opportunities for students. And that includes things like placements, work-integrated learning, authentic learning experiences, which can roll off our tongue, but actually when you're a regionally based student or working in a remote area or trying to change your life circumstances, that can look more difficult or be more difficult than it might look or seem. So this is an oft worn path. We've been talking about this for many years. One of the purposes of the conversation is, how do we move the conversation forward? What are we not talking about? What are we not thinking about? And I just like to acknowledge that it's a really complex space. There are perspectives that could be in the room that aren't on this panel: First Nations, the country university centres, student representative groups. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that we're very aware of all of the different perspectives and really consider this to be the beginning of a conversation. So with all of that said, I would love our panelists to introduce themselves. So I will hand over first to Tara, just to introduce yourself and talk about your experience and passion for regional.
Thank you, Kate. I'm very honoured and grateful to be here. This is a topic that's very close to my heart, and similar to you, Kate, I've lived and worked in regions for longer than not in my professional life. Whilst I'm here on the Sunshine Coast in Kabi Kabi land at the moment, I'm actually kind of in Gympie, so you could say I'm regional. I wouldn't consider that regional or remote, but I was in Port Hedland for about 8 years. I went over there and started and founded my own registered training organisation, simply because there was nothing else for me to do. I'd come from QUT, I'd been at universities, there was no university there. And so I could see that there was a need for better quality education. And so I founded the first private RTO in the region, in the Pilbara, and had 40 staff that were all women, because that was the only way I could actually recruit a team and build the business that way. I was on the Headland Well Women's Centre as well, and at the same time we were doing a lot of support for women in general, but also in study, and that includes First Nations women. And I also was doing my master's degree, my MBA, while I was in Port Hedland, and then moved to Gladstone and continued to grow and build a business. And the whole way through, I've also been supporting a lot of regional businesses in terms of how they scale and how they employ and how to recruit and build talent pipelines within their region. So much so now that I am doing my PhD in that, and my thesis is looking at how social capital particularly drives employability and entrepreneurial outcomes for young people within regional Australia. So I'm just waiting for ethics clearance, and then I'll be looking for people to be involved in my research project, because I think it's a really important piece of research. So that's a bit about me. I'll talk a little bit about some of my experiences more as we go through, but I'll hand over to the other panelists.
Thanks, Tara. That's awesome. And I'll hand over to Natalie.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel. As Kate said, my name is Natalie Cook. I'm the Director of Innovation, Industry and Employability in the Health and Education faculty here at Torrens University. And it's a mouthful, right? So it's sort of like a position description in a job title. And it basically means I've got fundamentally real interest, a vested interest in the employability outcomes of our students in health and education. And that's mostly achieved through the programs or the courses that we offer and the way students connect with industry while they're in those programs, and whether that's by virtue of having those programs recognised and meeting the requirements of the professional bodies that govern those professions, or if it's about the way students engage with industry in things like work integrated learning. And as Kate said, most commonly people think about placement. So you think about nursing students doing placements, going out to facilities for those. And we also have students in our health sciences where we operate our own clinics in the university, and our health science students do their practical hours in those. My background academically is originally a commerce degree in marketing, and then later a health science degree in complementary medicine. So I'm a naturopath, and then more recently a master's in public health. So I've got a really holistic perspective or view on individual and community health, and I'm really interested in the interplay between those. And I think looking at cities and countries also is a part of that, because we're all just sort of scales of communities. As I said, my primary interface is around students and their placements or their clinical practicums, and the challenges for students not based in cities, because acknowledging these are place-based experiences. And health has got a lot of them. We've got a lot of accrediting bodies, and we've got a lot of requirements that we need to meet. And the fact that people do need to do hands-on, face-to-face learning to learn some of these skills in a safe way. So I'm very firmly in an urban environment, always have been. I'm on Wurundjeri and Wurrung country today that I'm coming to you from. But yeah, that's my perspective.
Thanks, Natalie. And over to you, Cole.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Thanks for inviting me to this panel. So my name's Colin Beer. I'm a regionally based academic at a regional university here, and I have been for the last 20 years. Prior to that, I spent 20 years working for a multinational IT company in the regions. So I've lived, worked, and studied in the regions my entire life. I've got a research interest, particularly around how universities respond to things like student attrition. And my favourite word popped up in one of the questions I see, which is around the deficit view of students when it comes to attrition and retention. And I've done some research in this, particularly around research and regional and remote students, and it's a real passion of mine to see that they get a equitable opportunity. Yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you. So we have a diverse panel, as you can see. So we're going to really then drill down firstly into thinking about the numbers of students, regional students. So out of the almost 10 million regionally based, that's about 37% roughly of Australia's population, only 180,000 are actually enrolled in higher education. So obviously a lot more are enrolled in vocational, which has an important role to play. But then the question is about how do we actually help people see themselves in higher education, because very often they don't see themselves in our environments. Almost 6,000 are imported by students are currently supported by regional university hubs across the country. So it's just such a hugely important initiative. So I'll acknowledge that. But there is a clear gap. And so the question for me is, what's the one thing you wish people knew about regional students and their experience that you don't think we're talking about? So Tara, I'll start with you.
I love this question. I reflected on it quite a bit, actually. I don't actually think there's a one thing, to be honest with you. So it's such a big question. But I think if I could drill it right down, my experience of being in the regions is, and maybe this is the reason why they don't choose higher education, but I feel like a lot of people in regions, and particularly remote Australia, when I was up in the Pilbara, are operating as generalists inside, at times, quite complex systems. So in the Pilbara, the mining system, and the dynamics that exist there is quite significant. You've got multi-generation. In some regions, you've got multi-generation unemployed, so you can't see what you can't be what you can't see. And then when you look at a region like the Pilbara, you know, you've got multi-generational, and, you know, I forgive me if anybody's from the region, but I can say it because I lived there for a long time. You've got a lot of cash up bogans that, you know, their parents have gone into a trade, they've gone into a trade, they get paid very good money to be there doing that. And then you have this reverse issue that exists for maybe the carers who aren't working in those sectors. When I was in Port Helen, it had predominantly been a FIFO town, and when they moved to iron ore, or BHP moved to iron ore, they really wanted to focus on bringing families back to town. There was no livability there. There was nothing, nowhere to take kids. There was no infrastructure, and that I was on the Pilbara Economic Development Board for a long time when I was there, and that was really our whole focus, was to try and create a community that actually families could be comfortable in. But you could not get childcare. You certainly could not be getting, you know, at that time internet wasn't great, but ultimately most of the carers are working juggling work and community roles. They were generally taking on community roles. So study was probably not something they were thinking about. And then also for young people leaving school, that's definitely not what they were thinking about. They were just looking at what they could see in front of them. So I actually don't think it's a gap. I actually think it's a capability around translation. And I don't think that we've done enough as a system, whether that's institutions or not, and certainly not communities, to convert those lived competencies into recognised pathways and portfolios. And show that there's a step change. We did a really big piece of work in Port Hedland to try and bring a university to Port Hedland, unsuccessfully. No university was wanting to do that. Yeah, I do know now that there's a community hub, so a university community hub there, and that's been fantastic in terms of impacting change for the region. So I think, you know, in urban society, we see a lot more of lots of professions. Often in a regional community, there's often one major employer or two major employers, so they're just seeing kind of a one pathway to work inside a potentially very simple, a very complex system that's quite narrow. So I think we've got to think a bit differently around that and understand that actually we sometimes apply an urban view to a community, and we need to be thinking about how we can connect with that community on their terms. That's my view.
Great, thank you. I'll hand over to Cole.
Yeah, look, I thoroughly agree with Tara that as a system, we've not done enough, and we're not doing enough, and it's very much a very complex and tangled problem. But if you held a gun to my head and said, what's one thing? I think the thing I'd like people to know about regional remote students is that they're starting from further back than metropolitan students, because they've likely had a lifetime of subtle disadvantage. I'm not talking just about socioeconomic status. These students have typically had less comparable access to infrastructure like resources, childcare, education, healthcare, transport, internet, those sorts of things than their metropolitan counterparts. So that sort of, if you look at it over a lifetime, that sort of sets you back compared to a metropolitan student. So I think we've got an education system now that's fair, but not equitable when it comes to regional and remote students. Thanks, Kate.
Great, so many questions already, but I will hand over to Natalie.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, thanks, Kate. It's interesting that one of the things I was thinking, that phrase, you can't be what you can't see, as Tara said, I think is a really important one. Also from a perspective of, whilst ever we've expected students from these communities to move to the city, say to come to university, then the impact that has on the community that they've left behind, the brain drain out of that community, particularly if then they go on to then stay living in the city, they don't come back, what that does to the sustainability of that community, the support for infrastructures, the life in those communities, but also what it does for the generations to come after them. So the next generation, their younger brothers and sisters even say that that's their perspective of what going to university means. Literally, you're leaving home, and that might not appeal to them. And so if that's the modelling that we've got, that's what going to university means, then they're not seeing other ways of doing that. I think just on that, you can't be what you can't see. I think we also, I think about the way we represent what universities look like. And I reflect even on, say, Torrens University's advertising, which is very geared towards accepting the fact that people are working while they're studying. That's just that's a norm, and so the need for flexibility. We've come an awfully long way. When COVID, to be honest, was a good catalyst in a lot of ways around making the way you can interact in an online environment much better, learning design and technology and all the rest of it. But still, when we reflect what that looks like, it's often a really urbanized, or it's invariably always a really urbanized view of what a student looks like. It's someone sitting, in a cafe with trains and things going past, or, we're not reflecting. So I think that there's an opportunity there just to literally consider how we reflect what university is and what it can look like. That isn't just an urban view on things, because that's not all our students are, obviously.
Look, absolutely. I was having a conversation with someone the other day just about the value of data for a regionally based student. So data is valuable anyway, but when you are working in online environments, and we're, all of these universities, all of us have got, fabulously, amazingly beautiful content now that we're talking about VR and XR, and again, this work integrated authentic learning experience. But if you are a regionally based student that actually has difficult accessing the internet, and I put my hand up to this because I only live 46 kilometres. I'm in a regional area, but I'm in a peri-urban region outside a metropolitan city that has black spots, and spent an awful lot of money supporting 2 university students who will use data while they're sitting, or in the car or whatever. And I can do that, I can afford that, but actually just the access to just really simple stuff that we may take for granted, because actually when you're in the city, it's Wi-Fi, point-to-point Wi-Fi. You can hook in anywhere if you're only ever 50 meters away from a Telstra network point. So the second question is that many RRR postcodes are actually also low SES postcodes, which we all know is a very, very crude measure for socioeconomic status in Australia. But despite many challenging that, it's still the way that it's calculated. So how can we move beyond the deficit thinking about RRR experience for students and current potential employers when we're looking at designing curriculum and experiences? And by that, really, I think I'm thinking about, there's so much strength in the regions. There's so much value. There's so much in healthcare. People they're working generalists on a ward. They're not specialising in one part. They're having to actually be the expert in a lot of stuff. Now, there's a lot of value in that. So yeah, how do we, I don't know, draw that out, or take, I suppose, even a strengths-based approach? And I will start with you, Natalie.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kate. No, you're exactly right. And coming from a health perspective, as I am, I think you're right. These centres are often microcosms of the broader community, because you have to have, if you're a GP in a regional town, you're going to see a whole lot of things that an urban GP just is not going to see. Same with vets, same with so many health professions. And I think that goes across. So I think understanding that there's value in that microcosm, because you're going to get exposed to things that you might not otherwise. So how do we actually harness that rather than seeing that as a deficit? I think also the role a lot of community infrastructure plays in these centres. So things like particularly sports clubs, community groups in particular, provide often a real social glue in these communities, but also then create networks beyond what you might, again, also get normally in a more urban environment, because odds are, because of your footy club or netball club or whatever, you are going to know people across a whole range of professions, and often these are sort of district clubs as well. So it's not just your town, it's sort of the broader region. So actually access to a broader range of people. I think also, I'll leave things for other people to say. But I think there's a certain irony in this as well, and it comes back to placements, that it is, we are the challenge of having our expectation that we need regional and remote students to come, to the place to learn. But at the other end of the spectrum, we've actually got a whole lot of opportunities for placements that are regionally based, and it's really hard to get urban students to fill them. So there's sort of an irony there too, and how we harness that. I mean, look, the beauty of this conversation is none of us are coming with the answers, but I think, as you said, provoking where these questions are and where there might be an opportunity. You know, could we do a better job of having a diversity of case studies in our curriculum? We try to be very inclusive in the way we represent people, but yeah, do we reflect Triple R people in those case studies? Maybe we could do a bit better of a job of that as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Natalie. And Tara, I think from the entrepreneurial, so you've obviously taken that, there's a lot of strengths-based stuff in your work. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, I was going to lead on from what Natalie was saying around social, you know, I would be remiss of me as a researcher and a passionate purveyor of social capital to not mention that as many times as I possibly can. So social capital in a range of different contexts means a range of different things, but essentially at its heart, it's all around trust, reciprocity, social norms, community, all the things we're talking about here. And my experiences in regional areas has been that happens naturally. I think social capital should be an asset that's actually developed strategically, like financial capital and human capital. We're talking about university students developing their skills, that's human capital. And so I think, just to lead on from what Natalie was saying, I think opportunities for urban and regional students to engage more, and as you said, Natalie, not having them to come to an urban environment to do that. What about if there's kind of immersive shared work integrated learning where they all come together within a region, which means everybody has to travel? I've seen some incredible examples where that's been done digitally through VR. You mentioned that before, Kate, but there's an amazing company here on the Sunshine Coast called The Bundle of Rays, and he's actually teaching nursing skills through VR and AR. He's doing it in partnership with the Philippines. And you know, that means that you're getting kind of like a metaverse environment where you're getting people coming into a virtual environment and engaging that. And I take your point, Kate, about connectivity. That's obviously a huge issue for a lot of regional areas, particularly remote areas as well. So, you know, physical immersions where you can actually connect to build social capital and share skills and ideas across urban and regional students, I think is really important. And then is there a way to kind of do some of those more simulated immersions, whether that's a virtual work experience or a virtual kind of learning where they learn together? I think that's kind of a cool idea. I've seen samples of that done when it's been quite successful before. And also, I think another thing that would be useful, again, because we need to remember these regions are really broad. So when we talk about urban in Port Hedland, there's about 6 other towns. I mean, Rocky and Gladstone's a great example too for Colin. This, you know, within a drivable distance, but you don't know anybody from those regions, or you may not. So how can you even bring the hubs in together and connect students through chambers of commerce or employers and kind of give those more immersive experience within a broader version of the region? And how can the university support that in that process? So that would be my view.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And you know what? I know this is terrible to say that I don't think I've actually ever really thought about bringing everybody together. You know, I've always thought, well, we need to do more in the regions, but the idea of dislocating the urban students into the region and bringing them all together, that was like a bit of a like, oh, wow, that's a really great idea. So thank you. And I've been teaching online and distance for 20 years. So there you go. So Cole, over to you.
Ditto to what's been said, but one thing I would add is I think the royal we need to be reframing the conversation around the conversation and the value proposition with regional employers. The number one problem is attracting quality staff to the regions and keeping quality staff. So, hey, why not grow your own in the regions, and they're more likely to stay in their family networks and things like that. There's an advantage there to the employers, and I don't think we've actually spent enough time you know, getting that message across. Like better connecting skills to employer needs is something universities could be doing more of. Showcasing digital collaboration to employers, you know, the whole work integrated learning, project problem solving in regional areas, those sorts of things. But I think it's already been said, better developing those professional networks between students, the regional employers, and the communities in which those employers are based.
Kate, could you mind if I just leap in here?
Go for it.
Thank you, Colin. Absolutely adore what you just said. And I just want to reflect, and this is public knowledge for anybody, but we were funded by the Department of Workplace Relations this year. The project's just finished to do exactly that. Was for advanced manufacturing on the Sunshine Coast. We took gap year kids that maybe are floating around, because I've got 4 of them not doing anything, can't decide what they want to do. 2 of mine have got ATAR of 94 and 98, and they don't know what they want to do because they're not looking at, they can't see what themselves at university. And we did exactly that. We did some pre-skilling with them. We put them into an 8-week work integrated learning placement with the advanced manufacturers on the Sunshine Coast. We also did a traineeship redesign in the businesses, so they could actually do kind of, I guess, a job simplification, so the students could go into those roles for a short term. And what we have seen, but some of the bigger roles that they're looking for, things like mechatronics and robotics. And so what the employers have done is they've actually brought these kind of young people in that are floating around, not choosing to go to uni, don't know what to do with themselves, being able to bring them into the context of the work environment, show them what it looks like to work in an advanced manufacturing sector on the Sunshine Coast. And those students have done a short-term traineeship placement and now go and enroll in mechatronics and engineering, but they would not have done that before that. And so I think that's, I just wanted to reinforce the value of what Cole just said. That is public knowledge. You can download the white paper of the outcomes of that project, but it was supremely successful in terms of supporting young people to stay on the coast, work with employers, but also choosing to go to university when they probably would not have done that. So.
And that speaks to the exposure, doesn't it, of something different, something that they hadn't seen or that they wouldn't normally have had access to. And that is one of the things that, having lived in regional for a long, long time, you know, is that there is just less exposure to different stuff, just naturally, because you are very often very isolated, you know, and I mean, you have to go pay $1 million to go to a concert on a weekend, so you do that twice a year. So, you know, you tend to locate your life in things like sport and community and networks and family, but actually that idea of going and doing something and thinking, oh, maybe I could do that, or maybe I would do that. And very often, because of the workload associated with giving students, even school students or university students, that work experience, that can be quite difficult for employers in regional areas, because they're actually quite strapped for time or staff, or they're regionally isolated or whatever. So it does become quite complex. There is a good segue there, actually, because I did get some questions from pre-questions for the panel, which was nice. And one of those is, what do regionally based employers need to know about how to work with universities, because they have a reputation of being quite difficult. So it's quite difficult to get these connections, and we're these big monolithic beasts, and sometimes, you know, in a university like Torrens or some of the big regional multi-campus universities, where you don't even know necessarily where to go to ask the question if it's distributed. So I'll start with you, Natalie, in terms of what might an employer need to know to engage with us well.
Yeah, look, we don't want to be difficult, I think is the first comment. But, you know, we're big machines, and even a relatively young university like Torrens, 10 years old, that's got a really agile mindset, we're still, you know, we're part free thinking and aspirational, because that's what you want universities to be doing. But we're also a business like any other business, and with processes and systems. And I think one of the things to think about, and we're powered by humans as well, right? So we're still subject to all of the fallibilities of any business. I think one of the things is we have to learn each other's language a little bit. And one of the things that I think often about universities, apart from how agile or quick we can be to act on different things, is that we work in quite prescribed cycles. And so Torrens, we run in trimesters. So that means you've got 3 study periods a year. They're 12 weeks long. And so that's where you find students. You find them in these packages of 12 weeks. And so if they're going to engage with something, it's in a 12, it's in that package. And the trimester's got a start date and a finish date and a date there you need your marking done by, and all these sorts of things. And of course, you know, we're constantly evolving that, and there's ways that you can be flexible with that. But just having even appreciation for what our, I guess, infrastructure and potential limitations are, so that we can engage in that conversation. Go, right, okay, I wasn't thinking about that. I wanted someone to start in May. I'm going, oh, that's halfway through a study period. So that's maybe not the best thing, or what the lead-in time is for when students are saying enrolling in a subject that's got an industry aspect to it. But what the lead-in time for them to start getting their heads around a project, or getting their working with children checks, or whatever, or getting their logistics sorted if it does mean working in a different area or a different time zone or something. So I think all things possible, but we need to speak each other's language and get some of those assumptions clear up front, because it's easy to assume that everyone understands how our different systems work.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Cole, what do you think, your views?
Yeah, I must admit I struggle with this one a little bit. Be patient would be one thing I tell employers, because universities are very large, cumbersome bureaucracies, and it is often very difficult to get to the person you need to talk to. But again, it's about reframing the conversation. The expertise, and particularly the out-of-the-box thinking you get from students, is hugely valuable. And so perhaps reframing the conversation around the sort of advantages rather than the disadvantages of engaging with universities would probably be where I'd start.
Yeah, thanks. Tara?
Yeah, I'm a bit the same as Cole. I haven't had in some of the regional universities I've worked with some great examples myself. But again, it comes down to finding the passionate advocate within the organisation that can sort of work with you. Where I've seen some really good examples has been where there's industry and the university has a like-minded outcome in terms of a project. So a really nice example I've seen recently was a Year 10 cohort at a school here on the Sunshine Coast has partnered with the UniSC to have students go in who are interested in research and work with PhD students on their research. And actually, in those cases, those students have discovered things in the research that the researcher had not, and has contributed to their research. So that's been, that's been a really well-known story that's here on the coast, and it's been a really successful project. So it took quite a bit of engineering to get there, but it's been it's a productive outcome because there's joint outcomes from both organisations, and obviously the Year 10 students are getting to experience research and then may choose that pathway when they finish school. So I think when there's an alignment of something and you can build a project around it, I think that's when it's been really successful from my perspective.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So the next question there is really about can we be confident about the way universities support working students in regional areas? So there's great examples, as you say, Tara. I think everybody at the moment, we're seeing everybody pile on to the equity bandwagon, and there is goodwill there, so I'm not questioning that. But one of the issues is about that perspective of the deficit, non-traditional positioning. This is a problem to be solved, rather than actually going, well, without regionally based communities, we have a very fractured economy. We don't have food. There's an awful lot of stuff that happens if our regions aren't vibrant and thriving, and a whole series of consequences that come from that. So rather than taking an equity, well, these are non-traditional students, it's okay, well, it's our responsibility to be part of Australia's future and future economy and future sustainability and growth. So what are we doing to contribute to that? And that means sometimes that we have to meet halfway rather than expect you to come into us. So in that spirit, the question then is, can we be confident that actually in the current environment, we're going in the right direction, I think.
You asking me that one?
Anyone who wants to answer. So I'll start with Tara, because your mic's off.
I think if there's leaders like you in universities like Torrens, then I could say yes. I think, and that you've got the headspace and the opportunity and the backing to be able to do that. I totally agree with you. One of the things that I've heard more often than not, and I've been a victim of feeling it myself when I'm in regional areas, we feel like employers, government fly into a region and tell us that this is how it should be done, or completely forgotten about it, forgotten about the region and making decisions for the region remotely, not even have spent any time in the region. So I think showing up in the regions and spending more time there, I think would be more useful. Something like the CUC centres are, ready-made partners in a lot of these regions that universities could be connecting through. Councils, if some have got employer hubs and council chambers of commerce, obviously schools are a bit harder to kind of get through to, but I think even sports clubs showing up where some of these people are and saying, we're here, we want to connect with you, want to work with you. There's a really great organisation called Country to Canberra that has been, it's funded to do predominantly young girls, but to take them to Canberra to give them an exposure to what the rest of the world, the Australia looks like from a governance perspective. So even experiences like that, and I still come back to immersions, but as you said, we're not where their regionals are always going to the urban areas. They're actually coming into their regions and listening to them and figuring out how they can actually offer support through whether it's micro programs, workshops, immersions, just meeting other students, any of those sorts of things, I think would mean that we could start to see some change. And joint research projects, I think that I've seen some huge success where universities have spent time in regions and said, what's a problem that we can come and help you solve, and work with you to do that within your region, and then getting other people within the region involved in that research project. I think it's been a really great opportunity, or a great example to connect universities to a region.
Yeah, that very much that breadth of that holistic view of that community network. So Natalie.
You just call me Nat. Kate, that's fine.
Yeah, that's it.
Look, I think universities have got a fundamental obligation to ensure that all students have got the best opportunity to succeed. And I think ultimately anything we do that supports whatever the lowest common denominator is in that is, then it supports everyone. And whether that's people with access and ability issues, whether that's regional, remote, whether that's whatever that might be, whatever we do that accommodates that particular need is actually invariably good for everybody. And so I think just in terms of the way, say, our libraries have innovated over time, so we're much more now oriented towards online libraries. We've still got face-to-face libraries, but with an online library, you think a textbook, you can't buy a textbook for less than $150, and so if you don't have to buy a textbook because you can access an online version, if you don't have to be able to get to a place-based facility to access those resources, then that's a win for everyone, but particularly remote and regional. Having policies in place for extensions, for accommodations to your learning needs, can support a whole range of students, and particularly in these cohorts as well. So I think also, there I mentioned COVID, but I'm in Melbourne, and so we had quite the COVID experience, and I think there's so much that got spoken about because it was a novelty for the large urban populations, particularly during that time. And I don't mean novelty in a good way, but the having to pivot to online learning, the isolation that potentially came with that, those particularly I think for, say, kids that were either starting school or finishing school or starting university, those real pivotal moments, how challenged they were in an online environment. And we've innovated a lot, as I said, around the way we deliver our learning, the great learning interfaces and technology and so on. But let's acknowledge also that regional remote students are always in that isolated bucket, so it's not a novelty for them. That's just the reality of the tyranny of distance there. So what else have we learned about the way you can be inclusive, the way you can form those things that again at university we might assume just happens? That's where you're going to meet your professional networks or your social networks, or you form a lot of those sorts of things, particularly for school leavers and younger students going in. So I think we've got an obligation there to learn, to keep innovating in those kind of areas, because I think the really pragmatic stuff we probably do quite well, but what about the social stuff?
Yeah, thanks. And Colin.
Yeah, look, I think universities, there is goodwill there. There is a definite will to do better for the regional and remote students. There's a few little bugbears of mine in this space, such as regional staff tend to be underrepresented at regional universities. So, the same sort of problem hiring staff from the regions tends to be not happen because we simply don't have that critical mass of staff that we can pull in for the regions. And some of the best educators I've ever come across have come from the regions. Absolute top-notch people. Another thing is, an example is a project I'm currently involved in is, I think the obligation for the universities is not just once the student arrives. It's about getting students into university. And I think it's easy to forget that obligation. And we've got a project at the moment that's looking at disaffected youth and trying to give them the dispositions, the self-regulated learning skills, and the belief that they can actually engage in tertiary education, these regional and remote students. So I think universities also have an obligation to their pipeline as well. And that means engaging with the schools in the regions, the disaffected youth, or whatever, however that might look. I don't think we've done enough in that space as well. And being a curriculum designer, I always look at things through a curriculum lens. And so I don't think our curriculum are necessarily providing the regional remote students the support they need in terms of having that embedded into the curriculum. We tend to offer support infrastructure as an add-on to our learning and teaching sort of environments, rather than an integrated part of the curriculum where we assume that the regional remote students are going to require X, Y, Z. So I think there's a lot of rethinking needs to happen in this space, and it needs to happen pretty soon, I think.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to throw out to questions in a minute, and then we've got one last word question for the panel. But as somebody, I'll just throw in my perspective because I can't. Because I live. It is the location piece, but it is just the assumption that we will have to work it out ourselves if you're regionally based. So and the number of times that I've been told, well, it's your problem, you decide to live there. When I was on 5 gigs, I had 5 gig a month, a whole month, and that was until about 8 years ago, right? So you can just imagine trying to run a family, 5 gig a month. And that was just outside of when I was living outside of Rockhampton. It takes me 2.5 hours to commute by driving and public transport. I have no public transport in the area, and so my children, who when they do their placements, it's hours, and we're in a position to be able to support them to drive to placements, health placements late at night, etc. So there is this. And you can't get away, we can't get away from that. The students have to get their face-to-face. They have to get the experience that they need. So the challenge is, how do we, work with accrediting bodies? How do we work with employers? How do we actually increase the pool of people who are willing to take our students a bit closer to home, for example, and then create partnerships and networks with us, so that they don't necessarily have to come the 900 kilometres in, maybe they only have to come 400 kilometres, or maybe we can meet you halfway. So there is no easy solution to all of this. And certainly there's goodwill, but, just even the experience that I personally have, where I have a child at a university, and despite the request to actually do a local, can I do it at this hospital, which is literally 12 kilometres down the road? Oh, no, you can't. I think we're in the wrong surname number, like you're in the A to Fs and they go over here. It's like, so there's that lack of, and it's like you're asking for an accessibility plan, but actually you're just asking for some room to move. And so that, then you can see how the liability is on the university then to try and work it all out, and you've got 2,000 students, and oh my God, if we did that for everybody, and you can hear it, if we did that for everybody, then we would never be able to manage this. But actually it's a very real issue for the students who live that. So so with that, any questions from the crowd, noting that there are quite a lot more registrations, and generally people register and then watch the recording later. But any questions from the group?
I might jump in, Kate. I do have a question. It's up to whoever wants to answer it. I'm just curious. What's the plan for Torrens? What action do you have a vision of taking to help solve this? It is a big issue, and as a student, I can relate to some things. No, I'm not regional, but some things of having access issues, I understand that. What's the vision? How are we gonna how's this gonna be solved?
I know what my vision is, but Nat, do you want to talk about yours and then I can insert myself?
Look, I'm going to put a small caveat in that some of these things aren't in the university's control, because some of them are dictated to us by the nursing accrediting body or the Chinese medicine, whatever. So we don't have infinite flexibility in a health perspective, particularly because we are governed by these. But I think we've got plenty of opportunities still. You know, do we look at our different governance processes with a lens of these communities? You know, do we ensure that we've got regional remote students on our student representative councils, in the different committees? You know, there's a student place on the academic board. You know, are there opportunities like that there? Are we co-designing curriculum with regionally based organisations? Are we looking for, like I said, case studies that profile not just, you know, Joe Blow, who's 35 and lives in Melbourne, but, you know, a different profile of students, so that we're reflecting those different realities in the learning experience? Because I think, to your point that you said earlier, Kate, it's not just a one-way responsibility here. There's benefits for urban-based people that have always, you know, have lived and probably maybe always will live in cities, to understand the country. It's not just for the, you know, the people living in these regional remote areas to fit in with what we're doing here in the cities. Because, like you said, you know, I mean, people go literally bananas when, you know, the price of bananas goes up, or you can't buy a, you know, a piece of stone fruit because there's been a weather event or a flood, you know, something like that. So I think, you know, and what better place than a university to foster understanding? I mean, that's part of our job, right? So I think we've got a lot to be gained, and it is part of our community and our moral role is to foster that understanding. Because, like you said, we don't got nothing to eat if we don't have people in regional communities growing us our food.
So thanks, Natalie, and I'm going to give you where I think. So I didn't realise when I came to Torrens that we had 3,000 rural regional remote students anyway. So out of that's a lot for us, you know. And so there are other universities such as you know, the big regionals, UNE, Central Queensland University, you know, Federation, like they do a great job, regionally connected, really important, valuable hubs. But there are some subjects and courses that we offer that they don't, right? And so the universities are starting to kind of get more specialised in some of the programs that we deliver. So I see regional Australia as an engine room, and a really important engine room. They are some of the biggest, most valuable economic companies in the world are in Australia's regions, and they provide enormous opportunity for local people to grow, but the partnerships that we can have with those industries, organisations, communities are incredibly important. And it is about the social health of our country as well as the economic health. And if we all don't commit to that as not only as an altruistic, but as a philosophy, well, then we're just all poorer for it. So that is, and how do we work in partnership? Because actually we can't deliver to regional, rural, remote students without working in partnership with either university hubs, without working with community groups. It's got to be a connected thing. Whereas at the moment in metropolitan, you can just come to uni and you can turn up and we deliver and it's all good and it's face to face. And you know, campuses are beautiful, lovely places to lie around and socialize in. So this becomes it has to be a proactive commitment by all parties to work together, knowing that it's actually just that little bit harder. But just because it's harder doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. And one of the things I think that is incredibly we know, and the research tells us this, is that the students who persevere, you know, they persevere. And one of the things about online students, and many of those online students traditionally also were rural, regional, remote as well, so they were dislocated from location, is that while there is a higher failure rate, the resilience shown to be able to complete in the face of all these issues, you know, the fact that they will up and leave home for 4 to 6 weeks to complete a placement, removed from home, find, you know, that there is something about that person who's done that and who advocates for themselves, that actually and organises their life and does all of that, pays $2,000 one way for a residential, that I think is something worth harnessing. And the question for us is just, how do we do that? How do we make it easy for all of us to connect together so that we can actually be better as organisations and as a community? Does that help?
Yeah, that does.
Yeah.
I have a big respect for rural people, rural families. I have family in Queensland that are sugarcane farmers, been in my family for generations. So I have a really big appreciation for rural Australia, and they keep the urban part of Australia running. Like, we would be lost without them. So how we can support them, I find, is really important.
Great. And for those who don't know Georgia, and who's watching the recording, Georgia is one of the students who's helped organise this. So, you know, yeah, thanks for contributing and having a say. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'll throw to our last word. Yeah, go for it.
Before I ask it, so I want to provide a little bit of context. So I studied with Torrens and I finished last year in August, and I did a nutrition degree. Now I live in a town called Wilmaringal, which is about 2 hours northwest of Bourke in New South Wales. So I had to commute about a 10-hour drive, because you can't fly, to Brisbane for about a year, back and forth for like a 2-week period, back and forth. And oh my gosh, it killed me. Like, it was insane. And anyway, but the other thing that killed me was the financial cost. Like, I had to work every single day that I was home to be able to fund that. And then, like, that sort of I feel like that impacted my ability to study, yada, yada, yada. Is there any potential future funding models or financing options that may be considered in the future? Because I'd love to go back and do naturopathy, but that's sort of my barrier at the moment.
Look, we are missing Wendy. And I would love to have a further conversation with Wendy, because Wendy, the Country Education Foundation, which does a fabulous job to actually connect students and education opportunities. There are grants and funding around that is absolutely to support exactly the kind of experience that you're talking about. So that would be the first thing, and I'll hand over to Nat in a second. But the other thing also, then, the question for me is, how can we design curriculum that reduces the impost, or actually possibly works in partnership with locals in the community to be able to help co-deliver something, when in fact one of the issues might be work and practical placement noting accreditation restrictions. So we know the research also tells us that when you have an accredited program, it tends to be less innovative and a little bit less flexible naturally, because it needs to be. And so that is just part of the conversation. So Natalie, any?
Yeah,
thoughts?
look,
Yeah.
Clearly I don't have the answer, because otherwise we'd be doing it and you wouldn't have had to do all of that driving. But what I will say is, it's a challenge, we know, and the government knows as well. You know, there's this term, placement poverty. It's a terrible term, but it's true. It's like, often it's you think of people like nursing students or teaching students, where they have to do long, but you know, likewise you did as well. It's just nursing and teaching are a bit more prominent in this area, where they've got to do, say, I don't know, 20 weeks of unpaid placement through the course of their degree, and sometimes that's going to be out of home. So you don't just have the cost of not being able to work during that time, but you might have the costs of needing to find alternate ways of supporting your family if you're the carer. So who's looking after your kids, your parents, whoever whatever that role is, and does that cost you extra? Then there's the cost of getting to the placement, and that might be something that you can sort of fly in, fly out of, or drive in, drive out of, or it might be something where actually you're going to be in situ for a 2 or 4 week block, and that costs, because there's accommodation. And so there's a real recognition that there are a number of disciplines, and as I said, health is disproportionately affected by these, where we do have an expectation that this is just part of learning, that students have to go somewhere, and there's a cost associated with it, and that's becoming more and more apparent, that's really challenging. It's challenging to fund it, to pay for accommodation while you're there. You're doing your placements. So it's something that the government has made some overtures towards in terms of some of their programs. But again, they've picked some of just the really high obvious programs, nursing, teaching, social work, those sorts of things. There are grants and things available. But yeah, as a university, what else can we do to be innovative in the way we deliver our curriculum that makes that more palatable? That's a work in progress, but it's something that we're acutely aware of. And as we go through, actually, as we are at the moment, we're in a review cycle for those very programs, those health sciences, and be really critically looking at what else can we do that might better serve you. So I think I can't give you I don't have a magic solution, but it's something we're really acutely aware of.
Thank you. I feel like even just having the recognition is like quite a bit, and just knowing that you guys are talking about it, like it gives me goosebumps actually just listening to this webinar so far. So it's been really nice. But yeah, I agree. I think, you know, I don't know what would work either. Like it's just still brainstorming.
But you know, that's a great point, you know, in terms of you know, I'm a student, so a lot of us, so I'm a regionally based student. Like the fact that we live it and are thinking about it, and it is just a very complex problem to solve. But the fact that you also have shown up and are in the room and are actually having the conversation, I think alumni, once you've graduated and you go back into your community, the question for me is how can we tap into that knowledge? Because you are now a graduate of ours, right? And there are other people in your community who might actually be then starting study. And so the question for me is, well, is that something that we can is that a network that we can use and tap into? And how do we do that? Is that like a peer support program or whatever? So there's so many different ways that we can help. You know, is it carpooling? I'm actually currently trying to work out, you know, where all our students are in relation to the university study hubs as an example of, you know, things that we can possibly look at. So, so yeah, thank you for being part of the conversation. And Catherine, oh, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, look, I think I'm a program director, so I deal with regional students on a really regular basis and understand their commitment and sacrifice and what efforts they go to attend. I think not having anything is a real problem. Having a list of cheaper accommodations, having maybe a network within our university community of people who have accommodation in their backyard, whether it be a granny flat or something would be good to help these students find accommodation, especially if they're not familiar with the hub that they're coming to. I think also having a list of opportunities for students to either apply for subsidies or have an opportunity to apply for a scholarship to help them with their travel costs, and even reaching out to industry to get industry to, you know, support some of these regional remote students. I think all of those things, you know, probably fabulous ideas, but require a lot of organisation. I think just having something would be good to help those regional students and encourage them to enrol. Because if you're sitting there looking at that commitment and you can see that there are costs that you may not be able to meet, or you don't know anyone in the metropolitan hub where you can stay, all of that becomes too overwhelming to even enrol, let alone getting to, you know, 4th or 3rd year or 6th year of your course and then trying to figure it out when so many things have changed in your life. So I really do appreciate this accommodation. I think the possibilities for supporting regional and remote students are really important. And, you know, I grew up in a regional area. I moved to a semi-regional university, country university, to go to uni and moved to the city and was able to progress that way. But, you know, 3 of my sisters didn't because, you know, it was really challenging. So I think this is, you know, a conversation that really needs to be explored further. And thank you for hosting this, and to the panelists for raising all those issues.
Thank you so much, Catherine. So, look, I'm a firm believer in, we all talk about changing the world, but people will have heard me say this over and over again. If we all made our backyards better, the whole world would be better. And, people in regional areas don't sometimes want to change the world, but actually just making our backyards better is a really great place to start, actually. And how do we help those backyards be better so that people can change the world? So I will hand the last word over, very conscious of time. Thank you for those of us who are sticking around, which is great. Why should we care? I think it's all evident to everybody why we should care, but you're making your pitch. Why should we care? Why is this really important conversation to have? So Tara, I'll start with you.
I'm just really going to reiterate all the fabulous words you said, Kate, and I think what everybody's really said around here. I'll speak. Rather than repeat something that you've already said, which I think is amazing. Around it is the food bowl of our country. It is also the productivity from our country. You could argue, and again, this is my Port Hedland hat on, that half of the reason why Australia has a fabulous middle class wealth is because of our mining resources. But also our advanced manufacturing is coming out of regional areas, and our agribusiness is really significant. So I'm going to put my entrepreneurship hat on and talk about the fact that actually a lot of the innovations that are coming out of Australia come from our regions, something like about 60% of them, with much less investment and much less support around research. So if we want to grow from our regions and we want to continue to grow from our regions, we have to support the talent development within our regions and give them opportunities to be able to learn and grow from their region, more and more. So I think that's my pitch.
Thanks, Tara. Natalie.
For me, it comes back to that. It's Australia. I think, your stats at the beginning about the numbers of people that live regionally, but, I think about, over 90% of our land mass is regional, remote, rural. So that defines us as a country. And so to only have an urban view and to only have the people in universities coming from urban backgrounds, living in urban centres, when we're making decisions about the way the whole country functions, it's missing literally a giant piece of the puzzle of who we are as a country, what we can do, what we should do. And we are, as Tara just said, we are entirely dependent on what happens in the regions for our economy, for our productivity, for our food, you name it, our resources, our trade, all of these sorts of things. So I think it's really one-dimensional to not factor in and to have a very two-way relationship between the city and the country. And like I said before, university is the right place to be fostering those sorts of conversations. It's our job, arguably.
Absolutely. And Colin.
Yeah, sorry, I've been doing a little bit of a slow burn on the last topic of conversation, and that Shanae and Catherine talked about. Now, universities often get charged for those placements, those clinical placements. So not only are the students suffering as a result of, the extra expense associated with that, but so are the universities. And so we're often getting charged by the same government that funds us, which is kind of ridiculous so taking that holistic perspective on this problem is so much needed. But why should we care about regional remote students? Well, I think Tara hit the nail right on the head. 2/3 of the country's productivity comes from the regions. 1/3 of the infrastructure spending happens in the regions. And so that's a problem. And that's a problem because we need to be expanding the opportunities for regional and remote students, and that encourages more students to live, work, and study in the regions as well. And so it becomes very much a national sort of priority in my mind. And it's something a lot of countries in the world have realised, particularly the Scandinavian countries. Those regional students are hugely valuable in terms of a nation's productivity and intellectual development.
Look, thank you so much. My heart feels very warm. I could talk about this topic all day, every day. It has been at the core of my personal career, and it is my personal life where you know, I have my 20 acres and my lemons and my chickens and my sheep, but I also have the benefit of getting in a car and being able to drive to a large metropolitan area. So I'm so grateful to the panel, Natalie, Tara, and Colin. But I would also, for those who aren't aware, this panel was organised by our students. And I will acknowledge and thank you all. So we have Georgia, we have Alana, Luke, Natalie, Mia, Ewan, and Hoyen, and very ably organised by Andrea, who I think slides into the end of term, juggling both a full-time job and also being an employee here at Torrens to support the students. So yeah, I'm just so grateful to you all. I wouldn't be able to do this on top of my day job, and so it is entirely to the support of the students that we're able to have these conversations. So we have the MIDSA series, we'll have another one in trimester 3, hopefully, and it really is just about continuing conversation. I would encourage anybody to reach out if you have any views, or do you want to actually be part of ongoing conversations. This doesn't stop here as far as I'm concerned. I'm absolutely committed to continuing the conversation, and very, very grateful to you all. So thank you. All right.